My own son called me stupid, uneducated, and sickly on his university graduation day. I'd worked myself into ill health to afford for him. His cruel words, captured for the world to see, were just the beginning of his downfall. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Brenda Jackson, and at 62 years old, the map of my life was etched not just in the lines on my face, but deep within the marrow of my bones. Each morning I'd rise before the sun, my joints protesting with a chorus of creaks and groans, a persistent rattling cough already beginning its daily assault on my lungs. My ankles, perpetually swollen like overripe fruit from decades spent on my feet, throbbed with a dull, insistent ache. This was the price I'd always told myself, the down payment on a dream far grander than any I'd ever dared to have for myself. My son Miles walking across a university stage, a degree in his hand, a future bright with promise spread out before him. For 23 years since the day he was born, just a year after his father had been taken from us by a swift, merciless fever, Miles had been my sun, my moon, my stars. A widow with little more than a high school equivalency and a fierce, desperate love, I'd poured every ounce of my being into that boy. 2 jobs, sometimes 3, were my constant companions. Days spent scrubbing floors in office buildings until my back screamed in protest. Evenings spent serving lukewarm dinners in bustling cafeterias until my feet felt like blocks of lead. Weekends spent taking in mending or ironing for the wealthier families in town. Sleep was a luxury, a brief, fitful interlude before the next relentless cycle began. My own health was a forgotten footnote, a bill I'd always intended to pay later, once Miles was settled, once his future was secure. That later never seemed to arrive. The cough, once a minor irritation, now clung to me like a stubborn shadow. The pain in my knees and back was a constant, gnawing reminder of years spent hunched over, lifting, scrubbing. But today all of that was supposed to fade into the background. Today was Miles's graduation day from City University with his bachelor's in business administration. My Miles, a college graduate. The thought brought a lump to my throat so tight it almost choked off my persistent cough. This was it. The culmination. The reward. My worn purse held a cheap disposable camera, its flash uncertain, and a small, slightly crumpled envelope containing the last $20 I had to my name until my next cleaning job paid out. A little something for Miles to celebrate with his friends. The university green was a riot of proud families, beaming graduates in their dark gowns, and the fluttering of colorful banners. I found a spot on a folding chair near the back, leaning heavily on the old wooden cane that had become my reluctant third leg. My ankles were particularly bad today, throbbing in protest at the long bus ride and the walk from the stop. But I wouldn't have missed this for the world. When Miles's name was called, when he strode across that stage, so tall and handsome, a confident smile on his face, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, hot and joyful. My boy. He'd done it. We'd done it. After the ceremony, the graduates and their families spilled out onto the sun-drenched lawn, a kaleidoscope of black gowns and beaming smiles. I spotted Miles surrounded by a group of his friends, all laughing and congratulating each other. He looked so different from the other graduates, I thought, with a surge of pride, more polished, more confident, like he was already a CEO in the making. I limped towards them, my heart swelling, my cheap camera clutched in my hand. Miles, honey. I called out, my voice a little breathless from the effort and the emotion. Let your old mom get a picture. He turned, his smile faltering slightly as he saw me approaching, his gaze flicking over my simple, well-worn dress, my sensible shoes, my cane. His friends, all bright young things from families who probably own summer homes, looked on with a polite curiosity that felt, to my suddenly sensitive heart, a little like judgment. Oh, hey mom, he said, his tone a little too casual, a little too cool. Yeah, sure. One picture. I fumbled with the camera, my hands shaking slightly with a mixture of pride and a sudden, inexplicable nervousness. Just stand there, dear, with your diploma. Let me see that wonderful paper. He rolled his eyes, a small, impatient gesture, but he held up the leather-bound certificate folder. I tried to focus, my vision a little blurry from the tears and the bright sun. Maybe one with your arm around me, Miles? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. That's when it happened. His face, just moments before alight with the triumph of his achievement, twisted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before, not from him. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Oh, for God's sake, Mom," he snapped, his voice loud enough for his friends and several nearby families to turn and stare. He snatched the diploma from my outstretched hand, not gently but with a rough, impatient tug. Then, with a sneer that cut me to the core, he contemptuously threw the certificate folder directly at my face. It wasn't a hard throw, not physically painful, but the stiff edge of the leather grazed my cheek, a stinging little insult. The folder clattered to the grass at my feet. "Here, you take it, Mom," he spat, his voice dripping with a disdain that was far more wounding than any physical blow. "This degree is probably the most education our family's ever seen. Too bad your stupid and uneducated, sickly self could never understand what it really means." The world seemed to stop. The cheerful chatter around us faded to a dull roar. His words, "stupid, uneducated, sickly self," echoed in the sudden, horrified silence. My son, my Miles, saying these things to me who had coughed her lungs raw over steaming laundry tubs to pay his tuition fees. To me, whose knees ached with a fire that never quit from scrubbing floors so he could have new textbooks. To me, whose heart was currently shattering into a million pieces at his feet, right next to that useless, expensive piece of paper. His friends stared, their smiles frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and embarrassment. One girl quickly looked away. Another's jaw had dropped. I could feel the weight of dozens of other eyes turning towards us, drawn by the sudden, ugly shift in tone. I stood there, frozen, my cheap camera slipping from my numb fingers. The sting on my cheek was nothing compared to the gaping wound he had just torn open in my soul. My lifetime of sacrifice, my boundless love, my fierce pride, all of it, in that single brutal moment, had been reduced to this. Public humiliation at the hands of the very son I had given everything to raise. The taste in my mouth was bitter like ashes. My dream, the one I had worked my fingers to the bone for, had just been thrown in my face. The world, which had momentarily stopped, began to spin again, but it was a dizzying, nauseating lurch. I was still standing there on the sun-drenched university lawn, the diploma folder lying at my feet like a discarded accusation. Miles, my son, had already turned his back on me, his shoulders stiff with a self-righteous anger, as if I were the one who had committed some unforgivable transgression. He was already rejoining his friends, perhaps offering them some dismissive explanation for his mother's scene. His laughter, when it came a moment later, sounding forced and brittle even from a distance. His friends, some still stared, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. Others, particularly the young woman whose jaw had dropped, were now looking down at their phones, fingers flying across screens. I saw the telltale red light of a recording on at least 2 devices pointed vaguely in my direction before they were hastily lowered. The thought barely registered then, lost as I was in the immediate searing agony of Miles's words. Stupid, uneducated, sickly self. Each syllable was a fresh nail hammered into my heart. Somehow, I managed to retrieve my cane, which had clattered to the ground beside my fallen camera. I didn't bother picking up the diploma. Let it lie there. It was his achievement and his shame, not mine. With as much dignity as my trembling legs and shattered spirit could muster, I turned and began the long, agonizing limp back towards the bus stop, the cheerful sounds of graduation celebrations now a mocking counterpoint to the desolation within me. Every polite smile from a passing stranger felt like a fresh accusation, every congratulatory shout for a nearby graduate a reminder of what my own son had just done. The bus ride home was a blur of unshed tears and a roaring in my ears that drowned out the city's noise. My small apartment, the one I'd kept clean and welcoming for Miles's infrequent visits, felt cold and alien when I finally stumbled through the door. I sank onto my worn armchair, the one where I'd spent countless nights mending his clothes or reading to him as a child, and the dam finally broke. I wept. I wept for the boy he had been, for the man he had become, for the mother whose heart he had just so casually, so cruelly trampled. I wept for my aching body, for the years of sacrifice that had culminated in this unbearable public humiliation. It was later that evening, after the storm of my initial grief had subsided into a dull, throbbing ache, that my old neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez from across the hall, knocked gently on my door. She held out her own well-used tablet, her kind face etched with concern. Brenda dear, she said softly, I think you need to see this. My granddaughter just sent it to me. It's all over the internet, she says. My heart seized. With trembling fingers I took the tablet, and there was a shaky, slightly out-of-focus video, clearly filmed on a smartphone. But the audio was horrifyingly clear. Miles's sneering face, his impatient snatching of the diploma, the contemptuous throw, his voice amplified and distorted, spitting out those vile words, "Your stupid and uneducated sickly self." And then the camera panned briefly to me, my face a mask of stunned disbelief and dawning agony, my cheap dress, my cane, my visible weariness all on display for the world to see. The video was short, barely 30 seconds, but it was enough. It was titled things like, "Ungrateful Grad trashes his mom," or "Son from hell humiliates his hardworking mother." Underneath, the comment section was a torrent of outrage, a digital firestorm. That poor woman. Her face. My heart breaks for her. What a disgusting excuse for a son. She clearly sacrificed everything for him. Someone find this mother and give her a hug. And someone find that boy and give him a reality check. I hope his university sees this. He doesn't deserve that degree if this is how he treats the person who got him there. There were thousands of comments, shares, likes, dislikes, a tidal wave of public opinion crashing down upon my son, and by extension upon me. My deepest, most personal shame, the humiliation I had endured in front of a few dozen people, was now being witnessed by hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't what I wanted. I had wanted my son's love, his respect, a moment of shared pride. Instead, I had his contempt and now the world's pity. But as I scrolled through the comments, through the righteous anger directed at Miles, through the outpouring of sympathy for the anonymous hard-working mother, something else began to stir within me, something beyond the shame and the pain. It was a cold, hard clarity. The world saw what I had perhaps refused to see for too long, blinded by a mother's unwavering, often foolish love. The world saw Miles not as my precious boy, but as a cruel, ungrateful young man. His words, his actions, weren't just a momentary lapse, a flash of graduation day stress. They were a reflection of a deeper rot, an arrogance and entitlement I had somehow allowed to fester, perhaps by my very sacrifices, by my constant willingness to put his needs before my own. The public outcry, the viral shame he was now experiencing wasn't my doing. It was the direct consequence of his own appalling behavior. The video, as painful as it was to watch, was also undeniable proof. Proof of his cruelty. Proof of my pain. Proof that the son I had poured my life into had become someone I no longer recognized. Someone who could look at his mother, his visibly ailing, hard-working mother, and feel nothing but contempt. A new kind of weariness settled over me, different from the physical exhaustion I lived with daily. It was a weariness of the soul, a profound disillusionment. The pride I'd felt just hours before watching him cross that stage was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. My dream hadn't just been thrown in my face. It had been stomped into the dust and broadcast for the world to dissect. The online comments continued to pour in, many calling for the university to take action, for Miles to face consequences. I didn't know what would happen. But as I handed the tablet back to Mrs. Rodriguez, a new grim resolve was beginning to form amidst the wreckage of my heart. My sacrifices had been met with scorn. My love had been met with cruelty. Perhaps it was time for Brenda Jackson to stop sacrificing, to stop enabling, and to finally, belatedly think about herself. The world had seen his truth. Now I had to decide what to do with mine. The image on Mrs. Rodriguez's tablet burned behind my eyelids long after she'd taken it back, her kind face etched with a mixture of pity and righteous anger on my behalf. My son Miles, a global spectacle of filial ingratitude. Me, the sickly, stupid mother, a viral object of sympathy. It was a grotesque distortion of the quiet, dignified life I had always tried to lead, the life I had sacrificed my health and dreams for, all for him. Sleep, when it finally came in the small hours of that dreadful night, was a battlefield of disjointed images. Miles's sneering face, the clatter of the diploma at my feet, the anonymous, angry words of strangers in the comment section, my own reflection in the tablet screen, a tired, broken old woman. But with the gray light of dawn, something else began to filter through the pain and humiliation. The echo of those thousands of voices, not just pitying but validating. She clearly sacrificed everything for him. He doesn't deserve that degree if this is how he treats the person who got him there. They saw it. They saw him. And in their seeing, I began to see myself not just as a victim, but as someone whose truth had, however painfully, been thrust into the light. My body still ached with a weariness that went bone deep, my cough still rattled my chest with every deep breath, but the weariness of my soul, the one that had made me want to simply fade away after Miles's cruel words, was being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. For years I had made excuses for him. His father's early death, the struggles of our low-income life, his desire for more than I could easily provide. I had always found a reason to forgive, to give more, to sacrifice more. I had enabled his growing sense of entitlement, his casual disregard for my feelings, by never truly drawing a line. Now the world had drawn it for me in bold, indelible ink. The public outcry, the viral shame he was experiencing, wasn't my doing, as I'd realized looking at those comments. It was the direct, unvarnished consequence of his actions. And if he was to face consequences from strangers from his university, then surely he had to face them from me, his mother. The mother whose sacrifices he had so publicly and cruelly mocked. My first practical thought was for my safety and my sanctuary. This small apartment, humble as it was mine. It was the only place I had left where I could feel secure. Miles still had a key. He'd come and go as he pleased, usually when he needed something: food from my sparsely stocked fridge, a loan from my meager disability check, or just a place to crash when his own chaotic life became too much. That had to stop. The viral video had, unexpectedly, brought a few kind offers of help from neighbors I barely knew, people who had seen it shared in community groups. Mrs. Rodriguez, bless her, had already checked in on me twice that morning, bringing a small pot of chicken soup. There was also Mr. Henderson from 3B, a retired handyman who'd always offered a polite nod. He'd seen the video too, his granddaughter had shown him. He'd knocked on my door earlier, his face grim, and simply said, "Mrs. Jackson, if you need anything at all, you just let me know. That boy needs a lesson." His words, and the quiet support in his eyes, gave me the courage I needed. Later that day, after Miles had likely seen the viral storm and was either hiding or trying to do damage control with his friends, I asked Mr. Henderson if he could help me with something. "My locks, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice low but firm. "I need them changed. Today." He didn't ask why. He just nodded. "I have a new set in my toolkit. Good sturdy ones." "Be happy to, Mrs. Jackson." While he worked, the rhythmic sound of his screwdriver a small, reassuring counterpoint to the turmoil in my heart. I packed a small box with Miles's remaining belongings. A few old t-shirts, some forgotten textbooks, the cheap trinkets he'd left scattered around. Not much really for a boy I'd given a lifetime to. When Mr. Henderson was finished, he handed me a new set of keys. They felt heavy, solid in my palm. "There you go, Mrs. Jackson," he said. "No one's getting in here now unless you want them to." I thanked him, my eyes stinging, and offered him money, but he just waved it away. Consider it a neighborly service. For peace of mind. With my home physically secured, the next step was to sever the financial ties, the ones Miles had so expertly exploited for years. My small disability check, the little I managed to save from my cleaning jobs before my health truly gave out, it all went into an account he had access to, an account he regularly dipped into. That had to end. I would go to the bank first thing in the morning. The hardest part was still to come, telling Miles. He hadn't called yet. He was likely either too ashamed, too angry, or too busy trying to salvage his online reputation. But he would call. He would eventually need something. And when he did, I had to be ready. I sat in my worn armchair, the one where I'd wept so bitterly the day before, and I thought about what I would say. The anger was still there, a cold, hard knot. But so was the pain, the deep aching sorrow of a mother who had lost her son, not to death but to his own cruel heart. I wouldn't scream, I decided. I wouldn't rage. My truth didn't need theatrics. It was devastating enough on its own. My sacrifices had been met with scorn. My love had been met with cruelty. My body was a testament to years of overwork for his benefit, and he had called me stupid and sickly for it. The world now knew my shame, but it also knew his. Anne Brenda Jackson, the stupid, uneducated, sickly mother, was finally, belatedly, going to choose herself. The financial support would end. The open door to my home and my heart would close. He had his degree, the one he'd thrown in my face. Now it was time for him to learn what it truly meant to stand on his own. The thought was terrifying, but also, in a strange, painful way, liberating. The hardest stand of my life was about to begin. The morning after I'd changed the locks and steeled my resolve, a fragile dawn broke, painting my small living room in shades of gray. The house felt strangely quiet. The absence of Miles's potential presence, his key no longer a threat, was a small, hard-won peace. My first act, even before my meager breakfast, was to visit the local branch of my bank. My hands trembled as I explained to the kind-faced teller that I needed to remove my son, Miles Jackson, from having any access to my account, citing personal reasons and a need to manage my own finances more directly. There were forms to sign, questions I answered with a quiet dignity that belied the storm still raging within me. By the time I left, that particular financial lifeline for Miles was severed. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. The rest of that day was a blur of anxious waiting. I expected Miles's call, his fury, his demands. But the phone remained silent. Perhaps he was still trying to manage the online inferno his actions had ignited, too preoccupied with his public shaming to realize his mother had taken decisive steps. It was actually Mrs. Rodriguez from across the hall who brought me the next piece of news. She knocked on my door late that afternoon, her tablet in hand again, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and sympathy for me. "Brenda, you need to see this," she said, tapping the screen. "The university, they've made a statement." I peered at the official-looking webpage she'd pulled up. It was a press release from City University. My heart hammered. The statement was carefully worded, full of academic jargon, but its message was clear. Following a review of widely circulated online content depicting behavior by a recent graduate that is grossly inconsistent with the values and code of conduct expected by this institution, City University has made the decision to revoke the Chancellor's Leadership and Community Values Scholarship, awarded to Mr. Miles Jackson for his final year of study and any associated postgraduate funding. Furthermore, the university is reviewing Mr. Jackson's conduct under its disciplinary policies. His scholarship revoked. The one he'd been so proud of, the one that had eased so much of my financial burden in his final year, the one that was meant to open doors for his bright future. Gone. The university, facing what was clearly a public relations nightmare thanks to the viral video of Miles's cruelty, had acted swiftly and decisively. They were distancing themselves from him, stripping him of his honors. A wave of complex emotions washed over me. There was no triumph, no joy in seeing my son face such a public and damaging consequence. Only a deep, aching sorrow. This was the boy I had sacrificed my health for, the boy whose future I had pinned all my hopes on. And now that future was unraveling thread by painful thread, all due to his own arrogance and cruelty. The press release mentioned the university was liaising with student support services to ensure all affected parties receive appropriate counsel. Affected parties. That was me, I supposed. The stupid, uneducated, sickly mother whose public humiliation had triggered this institutional earthquake. The news of his scholarship revocation likely reached Miles before he even thought to call me about his changed locks or his suddenly inaccessible bank account. This was a blow to his pride, his future prospects, and his finances, far greater than anything I could have inflicted directly at that point. The viral shame I had witnessed on Mrs. Rodriguez's tablet was no longer just a fleeting internet moment. It was having tangible, devastating consequences on the life I had worked so hard to build for him. I spent that evening in my worn armchair, the new keys to my apartment feeling heavy in my pocket. The silence in the house was profound. Miles still hadn't called. Perhaps the shock of the university's decision was too great. Perhaps he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his actions, the depth of the disrespect he had shown not just to me, but to the very institution that had tried to honor him. My cough, a constant companion, seemed a little looser that night, my aching joints a little less fierce. It wasn't happiness I felt, not yet. But it was something akin to a grim validation. The world, it seemed, agreed with the lesson Mr. Henderson had muttered. That boy needs a lesson. And the lessons were now coming thick and fast, from sources far beyond his beleaguered mother. His carefully constructed world, built on my sacrifices and his burgeoning arrogance, was beginning to crumble. And I knew with a chilling certainty that his desperate, angry call to me was not a matter of if, but when. I just had to be ready for that too. The hardest part of my stand, I suspected, was yet to come. The call, when it finally came nearly a week after the university's damning press release, was not the desperate, angry outburst I had braced myself for. Not initially, anyway. It was late evening, a cold rain lashing against my small apartment window, mirroring the bleakness in my heart. I'd just taken my medication for the persistent ache in my knees, the ones that screamed a protest every time I moved, a constant reminder of the decades spent scrubbing other people's floors so Miles could have his chance. Mom. His voice was small, hesitant, almost boyish. For a treacherous moment my heart lurched, the old maternal instinct flaring up, wanting to soothe, to comfort. I had to physically grip the armrest of my chair to steady myself. Miles, I said, my voice carefully neutral, devoid of the storm of emotions, anger, pity, a profound weariness that churned within me. Mom, I messed up, he began, his voice thick with what sounded like unshed tears. I saw the video. Everyone saw it. The university, they took back the scholarship. I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry, Mom. For what I said. For everything. I was stressed. Graduation, I wasn't thinking. Was this it? Was this genuine remorse? A tiny, fragile seed of hope tried to sprout in the barren landscape of my heart. It was more than just not thinking, Miles, I said softly. It was cruel. It was a betrayal of everything I've ever done for you. I know, he cried, his voice cracking. And I hate myself for it. I was an idiot, a monster. Please, Mom, you have to believe me. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to act big in front of my friends, trying to be someone I'm not. He paused, then the familiar cadence crept back into his voice, the one I knew so well. Look, I'm in a real bind here. Without the scholarship money and with you cutting off my allowance, I can't even pay my rent for next month. My landlord's already breathing down my neck. Can't I come home, Mom? Just for a little while? Until I get back on my feet. We can talk properly then. I can make it up to you, I swear. There was. The apology, however tearful, was merely a prelude to the request. Home. Money. My heart, which had dared to soften, hardened again. The locks on my door were new for a reason. Miles, I said, my voice firmer now, your actions have consequences. Serious ones. Coming home right now, that's not the answer. You need to understand the gravity of what you've done, what you've become. But where am I supposed to go? He wailed, the self-pity now evident. My friends, they're all being weird since the video. No one wants to be seen with me. You're my mother. You can't just throw me out on the street. I didn't throw you out, Miles, I corrected him, my voice like ice. You threw me away publicly, on the day that should have been a celebration of my sacrifices as much as your achievement. You threw away your scholarship, your reputation, with your own cruel words and actions. His tone shifted then, the veneer of remorse cracking to reveal the familiar, ugly entitlement beneath. So this is it then? He sneered, his voice rising. You're actually going to abandon me? After all your talk about family, about sacrifice? Some mother you are. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing me suffer. The argument escalated quickly from there. I tried to remain calm, to explain that he needed to take responsibility, to seek help perhaps for his anger, his arrogance. But he wasn't listening. He was raging, his words a torrent of blame and self-pity. He accused me of ruining his life, of being a vindictive old woman, of never truly supporting his ambitions, a claim so ludicrous given my ruined health, that it almost made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound. How could you do this to me, Mom? Miles wailed, his voice now a furious roar through the phone. I'm your son. You're supposed to help me, not kick me when I'm down. My voice, when I finally spoke, trembled not with fear this time, but with a profound, weary anger. How could I do this, Miles? I shot back, the years of suppressed pain finally erupting. I worked myself to the bone. My back is shot, my knees scream every time I take a step, this damned cough. I punctuated the word with a racking spasm, is a constant reminder of the factory dust I breathed for years so you could have clean air and a fancy education. I gave up everything, Miles, everything so you could stand on that stage. And you repaid me by throwing your success in my face and calling me stupid and sickly for the very sacrifices that got you there. You dare to ask me how I could do this. His response was a string of curses, vile and shocking, followed by a chilling threat. You'll regret this, old woman. You need me more than you think. You'll come crawling back, begging me to forgive you. Then the line went dead. I sat there, the receiver still pressed to my ear, the silence in my small apartment deafening. His renewed outburst, his utter lack of genuine remorse, his immediate reversion to blame and aggression when he didn't get what he wanted. It was the final agonizing confirmation. My son, the boy I had loved beyond measure, was truly lost to a monstrous entitlement and cruelty. The hope that had flickered so briefly was extinguished, leaving only the cold ashes of certainty. My decision to change the locks, to cut off his funds, had been the right one. The hardest one, but the right one. He hadn't learned a thing. His apology was just another manipulation. He still saw me not as his mother but as a resource to be exploited, a target for his rage when that resource was denied. The thought of him returning, of him trying to force his way back into my life, into my home, filled me with a new kind of dread, but also a new, unshakable resolve. I had to protect myself, not just my finances but my very spirit, from his poison. The door to my home was locked. And now the door to my heart, the one that had always been wide open for him, was beginning to close, bolt by painful bolt. The dead silence on the phone after Miles's vile threat. "You'll regret this, old woman. You need me more than you think. You'll come crawling back, begging me to forgive you," was a chilling punctuation mark to the ugliest chapter of my life. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand surprisingly steady. The hope I'd foolishly allowed to flicker when he'd first called, feigning remorse, was now utterly extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, hard ashes of certainty. My son, the boy I had sacrificed my health and my dreams for, was lost to a monstrous entitlement and a cruelty that had finally severed the last frayed threads of my maternal obligation to enable him. My decision to change the locks, to cut off his funds, had been the right one. The hardest one, but undeniably right. His apology had been a lie, a strategic maneuver. He hadn't learned a thing from his public shaming, from the loss of his scholarship. He still saw me not as his mother, the woman who had given him life and every opportunity she could scrape together, but as a resource to be exploited, a target for his rage when that resource was denied. The thought of him returning, of him trying to force his way back into my life, into my home, filled me with a new kind of dread, but it was now intertwined with an unshakable resolve. I had to protect myself, not just my meager finances, but my very spirit, from his poison. The door to my home was locked. And now the door to my heart, the one that had always been wide open for him, was beginning to close, bolt by painful bolt. It was 2 days later, a gray, drizzly afternoon, that the pounding began. Not a knock, but a furious, demanding hammering on my newly secured front door. I knew even before I peered through the peephole that it was Miles. His face, when I saw it, was contorted with rage, his eyes bloodshot, his hair disheveled. He looked like a cornered animal. "Mom, open this damn door. I know you're in there, you old witch. You can't do this to me," he roared, his voice muffled but still carrying the familiar edge of aggression. I stood on the other side, my heart thumping, but my resolve held. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who had changed the locks for me and had been quietly keeping an eye out, appeared on his own porch, a silent, sturdy presence. Miles saw him and his shouting faltered for a moment, replaced by a sneer. "What are you looking at, old man?" he spat before turning his attention back to my door. "Mom, I need to talk to you. You owe me an explanation. You owe me money." I spoke through the closed door, my voice louder and firmer than I thought possible. "Miles, I owe you nothing more. I told you my financial support has ended. You are not welcome in this home while you behave like this. Please leave before I am forced to call the police." "The police?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You wouldn't dare. You're my mother. You're just being dramatic." He rattled the doorknob violently, then kicked the base of the door with a thud that reverberated through the small apartment. That was when Mr. Henderson stepped off his porch and walked towards Miles. "Son," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "your mother has asked you to leave. I suggest you do so. Now, before this escalates into something you'll truly regret." Miles whirled on him, perhaps about to unleash another torrent of abuse, but something in Mr. Henderson's steady gaze, or perhaps the sight of Mrs. Rodriguez now appearing on her porch too, her arms crossed, made him hesitate. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a sullen, resentful glare. He kicked the door one last time, a petulant, childish gesture, then turned and stalked away, shouting over his shoulder, "You'll be sorry for this, Mom. You'll all be sorry." I leaned against the door, my legs trembling, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Rodriguez came over, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, Brenda?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her hand on my arm. "I will be," I said, taking a shaky breath. "Thank you, both of you, for being here." That incident, his furious return, his utter lack of remorse, cemented my decision. Later that week, after speaking with a free legal aid service Mrs. Rodriguez recommended, I sent Miles a formal letter, registered mail, reiterating that he was not to contact me in a harassing manner, that he was not welcome at my home under the current circumstances, and that all financial support had ceased. I also, with a heavy heart, updated my will, ensuring that the little I had would go to a distant niece who had always shown me kindness, or perhaps to a charity supporting single mothers. There would be nothing left for the son who had thrown my sacrifices back in my face. The weeks turned into months. Miles didn't try to break down my door again, though I heard through the grapevine of community gossip that he was struggling, bouncing between friends' sofas, his reputation in tatters, his job prospects non-existent after the viral video, and the loss of his scholarship. Each piece of news was a fresh pang in my mother's heart, but my resolve did not waver. This was his path to walk, his reckoning. One evening, about 6 months later, the phone rang. It was Miles again. His voice was different this time, quieter, stripped of its usual arrogance, almost hesitant. He didn't ask for money. He didn't rage. He just talked. He told me about a menial job he'd finally found, about the tiny room he was renting, about how hard it was. He didn't apologize, not in so many words, but there was a weariness in his voice, a hint of something broken that hadn't been there before. I listened, mostly in silence. When he finally fell quiet, I said, my voice gentle but firm, "The world has seen the man you chose to be on your graduation day, Miles. Your anger when I cut you off only proved you hadn't understood the depth of your own cruelty, or the pain you inflicted after a lifetime of my sacrifice. I will always be your mother, and that bond, however scarred, will never fully break. But I will no longer be your enabler, nor will I be your victim. This door and my financial support remain closed until you find genuine, lasting remorse, until you build a life based on respect, for yourself and for others. That journey, son, is yours alone to make." He didn't argue. He just said, "Okay, Mom," his voice barely a whisper, and then he hung up. I didn't know if he would ever truly change, if he would ever understand the devastation he had caused. But as I hung up the phone, I felt a profound, if somber, peace settle over me. I had spoken my final truth. I had set my boundaries. I had chosen my own dignity, my own well-being. The community, those who had seen the viral video and heard whispers of my quiet strength, had rallied in small, kind ways. An offer of a ride to the doctor, a shared cup of tea, a knowing, supportive smile. I began to focus on my long-neglected health, taking my medications regularly, going for short, slow walks with Mr. Henderson, even joining Mrs. Rodriguez's gentle seniors exercise class. My cough was still there, my knees still ached, but the weight on my spirit had lessened. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a quiet, resilient hope for my own future.